Good morning. Welcome to Organized, a webinar series on organizational capacity building. I'm your host, Leisha McKinley Beach. The Emory University Campus Coordinating Center created these monthly webinar series to share with a broader audience of Southern, I'm sorry? To share with a broader audience of Southern nonprofit professionals some key information on HIV they may be missing. These webinars were designed for the busy nonprofit professionals on the go to get a quick training and find resources to help their organizations function at the highest level. These webinars were designed to give people a look at other trainings that Compass has available. Each webinar will highlight one or more of the 8 core areas of the capacity building trainings. For more information on one of the trainings, we invite you to request a training at our website that will be listed in the chat feature. Today's webinar, Ask the Preachers, is about HIV in the faith-based community. This webinar will highlight a few strategies that CBOs, medical facilities, and other organizations can use to successfully partner with faith-based organizations to help address HIV in our Southern communities. Did you know that there are faith leaders who are pioneers in HIV prevention, care, and treatment? Most importantly, providing hope to people living with HIV and support to those who were transitioning because of HIV. And although we still have a ways to go in educating communities of faith, we want to take a moment and say thank you to our champions who are serving this community to ensure messaging and education is culturally appropriate for the population. Today, we will hear from two of those amazing champions, Reverend William Francis of Georgia and Elder Carmarion D. Anderson of Texas. Reverend Francis?
Yes, how you doing this morning? Great, can everyone hear
me? Good morning, Reverend Francis. Is there a way for you to increase your volume so our listeners don't miss all of the great wisdom you're about to impart in us?
Okay, I may have to just play with that as we're speaking today. But again, my name is Pastor Will Francis, and I am the lead servant of the Hub, where we are transforming ministry minds, lives, and souls in order to transform communities, as well as the world in which we live in. I've been doing HIV work now for about 10 years, and that has been everything from prevention to treatment, as well as now doing care. And very excited to be with you all this morning. And I want to thank Compass for this invitation to participate this morning. So I wanted to just share with you a little bit about engaging faith-based organizations. Because I truly believe that the faith-based organization really is going to be key in ending the HIV epidemic by 2030. Social justice framework is something that my ministry has been based on, where we just simply believe that everyone should have a fair opportunity to attain their God-given potential, and no one is disadvantaged from achieving this potential. What we have done is we have worked with faith-based organizations across this country, here in the South, as far as the West Coast, and really worked around the social justice framework. This is the one thing that we can get any denomination, any faith, any religion to agree in, is the social justice issues behind HIV. That when we think about social determinants of health, we look at income and social status, we look at workforce development, education, literacy, physical environment such as supportive housing, social support, coping skills, as well as access to health services and safe places for all people. I know that there's a lot of conversation about being inclusive and affirming, but really all churches are inclusive and affirming. I truly believe that we have taken inclusive and affirming and really labeled it or attached it to the LGBTQ community. Said, but when someone comes to our ministry and asks for a sandwich, we don't necessarily ask them for their sexuality or gender. We just provide the need. So I think when we focus on the social determinants of health, and I know this is a conversation that many in the HIV community have had, said that we can really bring faith-based organizations onto our platform in reference to working with the fight to end HIV. If we go to the next slide. So here we have a couple of resources that I've worked with personally, Balm and Gilead, as well as the Black Church and HIV Social Justice Imperative. And what this helps us do is really complete the care cascade. Many of you are familiar with the care cascade. It starts with those with HIV and ends with those that are virally suppressed. But I believe that there's one box missing from the left side and definitely a box that is missing from the right side. To the left side, if we put social determinants of health, and to the right side, if we have healing, I believe that that completes the plan to end HIV. So I'm looking forward to your questions. I like really talking, conversationally, but looking forward to your questions in a little bit. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Elder Anderson.
A subject that I am so thrilled and excited to talk about and integrating my passions as one. I am Carmarion D. Anderson. I'm actually the founder and executive director of Black Transwomen Inc., which is a 501c nonprofit organization, and my mission is focused on Black trans women to uplift their voice, heart, and soul within communities. I do reside in Dallas, Texas, where I also work in public health, and as well as a consultant focusing on the needs of HIV and AIDS in marginalized communities. I'm also an associate elder here in Dallas, and I also serve in the National Reformation of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries as the co-minister that support and being the liaison to all of our trans ministries within our Reformation. Having 15 plus years in HIV, I always find it is very important that we speak as it relates to specifically Black and Brown communities, that we have to speak about culture. And that's the whole purpose of this webinar, because faith-based is part of our culture. And so finally, I want to thank Emory and the Compass Initiative for this opportunity. You see a quote on my page which says, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that do." So why am I inspired by that quote? Well, I'm inspired because I have something to say. I believe that being clergy, being Black, being female, and put the icing on the cake, being someone who is a woman of trans experience, oftentimes when those portions of my intersectionality shows up, a lot of times people may not listen to me. And in this particular cartoon, as you can see in front of you, hold my calls until I'm willing to listen, I want to be able to provide a correlation from my personal experience, working in the field, being clergy, and as well as being someone who is part of the marginalized community. And most individuals that are part of the faith-based, especially the Black and Brown community, will fall within the category of being disenfranchised. And so a lot of times when we look at cartoons like this, or perhaps if you can make an audit of your own office when you're sitting at your desk perhaps, or think about the faith-based leaders who are in their office. And if you look at the cartoon, you just basically have a calendar, you have a phone, the phone gets ringing off the hook, someone has a testimony, somebody has something to say, someone has a need, someone is struggling, need resources as it relates to HIV, but yet or the leaders of the faith base were looking at the phone. Or maybe the phone is representing a listening line that we don't want to hear, which means that in my position and those that work in the field, those co-laborers, as I like to call in the HIV world, doing the work, we sometimes have to show up very visible. And sometimes having that visuality is going to allow them to get the attention and know explicit what we are needing and how we can make partnership. We cannot always rely on the phone. For my own personal narrative, it's very difficult for me to have conversations just verbally without having the opportunity to show up for visibility, so I can ensure that Miss Clarity shows up, becomes both of our best friends, which will link us with the passion of the work that we're doing in HIV. So the important thing I want you to understand that we all have something to say. You have something to say from the grants that you are running, that you apply for, that you said that, yes, I am capable of meeting the objective. And Black church, because marginalized individuals are in those spiritual houses or faith-based communities, we will reach out and connect with them, but really are to do so. If not, we'll just be looking at the phone seeing who's going to call who. We have to show up to be counted and give a testimony if we're going to combat HIV and reduce the epidemic. Next slide. In addition to that, I find from my own narrative and running prevention programs that it's very important, no matter what setting that you're outreaching in, what community, it's very important to know who you are sending. So who is being sent? As we're talking about the faith-based community, a couple things come to mind, and I just really want to exercise this opportunity to really lean on my faith, which is from a Christian narrative, but I'm hoping that it'll be inclusive enough where you'll understand that it is important that we be very prepared, knowing that visual and conversation and presence means something, especially to hard to reach communities. In the field that I work in, I use responding-driven sampling or snowballing, which means that I make partnership perhaps with gatekeepers, perhaps gatekeeper in the church, that will also will persuade the ministry or the spiritual house that will allow me that trust level to show up. But all of us who is passionate about the work will show up, but not all of us are available and not all of us are equipped. Yes, we're passionate about reducing HIV, but organization or spiritual house or worship center, a lot of times that's taboo. We really don't speak about the nature of natural sex and behavior. That's generally not spoken across the pulpit. It's not spoken reference in the synagogue. It's really kind of a hush-hush conversation. So how do we combat that in showing up? There is a Christian passage in Isaiah, which is around the 6th verse. And I just want to read a word to you as we move forward. And I'm going to do this from a storyline since I'm a character preacher. And it says, and then I heard the voice of the master. I heard the voice of the grantees. I heard the voice of my executive leadership team. I heard the voice of the prevention manager. I heard the voice of the case management, the outreach. Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And so I, personally, the individual who is saying, I am equipped, I'll go, send me. And then those higher up who are commissioned to send us, tells us to go tell the people, tell them to listen. There is a crisis. There is HIV rampant in priority populations that we're trying to get into to reduce the level of HIV. And then in this particular passage, it goes on and say, we need them to listen, but they're not going to. They need to look very hard, but they won't catch on. And why? Because these people are blockheads, which means that their fingers are in their ears, they're ignoring an issue, and so along with that, they won't hear what we have to say. So they'll have no clue about any of the epidemiology, the survey, the surveillance, the rampant of HIV that's sitting right in their congregation. And so it says that they will not get the attention or will not realize that there is a crisis until there's no more people in the land, no more people in their church, no more people in their synagogue, in their houses. The cities will be empty, and then we'll be wondering why. And that's because we have to be prepared to know how to articulate the reason why we are coming, reason why HIV and health disparity is very important from a faith-based lens, because let's be true, majority of faith-based leaders are the president of our community. And so if we can get them on the bandwagon, then therefore we're able to then motivate those leaders to speak on our behalf, build wonderful collaborations and partnerships, and see the epidemic of HIV being reduced in disproportionate populations such as Black church, brown church, synagogues, Muslims, and so forth and so forth. Next slide. So the interesting thing is that there is a wonderful formula. So what's the formula? And I love this kind of cartoon character. We'll play a game perhaps. It's do's and don'ts. And we understand from grade school on up that even in our day-to-day conversations, we do have the 5 W's and the H. And that's the who, what, where, when, why, and how. So if we create a formula with the do's and the don'ts, it's important as an example, who are you talking to? It's very important to know that. If you don't know who you're talking to, then how are you expecting to actually deliver a message or prepare to deliver a message? Because you can't talk and show up and talk about HIV. You can't show up and try to collaborate with your agencies, and you're on the phone with it's like you're on the phone with your boo or best friend. The dialect, the level of conversation, the choice words are going to be different. So you may have to do some homework. And so that's the do. Do your homework so you'll know the who you're speaking of. Without doing your homework, then therefore you may not be able to build that great collaboration and fellowship that's needed to build that level of trust. And then we have what? The do's and the what. Well, what are you showing up for? We all are leading or under some type of initiative, if that's grant-based, if that's personal funding. The monetary that's going to reduce HIV gives us a clear direction on what we are able to do. We write for it, we write our objective, but how do we articulate that? It is important that we don't go and show up and articulate it like we are verbally writing a grant to the individuals and so forth. When you look at the do's, the don'ts, who, what, where, when, then we have the wonderful opportunity to now know how. It's a collaboration. I want to focus finally before we go to questions on the when, the do's and don'ts. Funny experience that I had actually in doing the work in faith-based communities. We wanted to partner with the Jewish community, and the Jewish community was very receptive of us, but we didn't know much about them when we start doing the particular work in that community. So we were trying to advertise, let us come to you on a wonderful Friday night. We'll substitute going out to the clubs and come to you and let us test. Well, Jewish celebrate the Sabbath from Friday evening until Saturday evening. So it was kind of inappropriate for us to make that type of recommendation. And so we perhaps have the collaboration that was needed to get into that subpopulation to ensure that HIV is being reduced as well. So finally, as I pass it over to Alicia, my whole purpose of this message is do your homework, show up to be counted, ensuring that there are tools before you go in to collaborate, that sometimes showing up and allowing them to see who you are is, then when it's time to do the work, you've already built that level of trust.
Thank you so much, Elder Anderson and Reverend Francis. After learning all of this helpful information, we imagine you have some questions for our two faith leaders. Please type in your questions in the chat box and we'll answer them as they come in.
And Alicia,
go ahead, Reverend Francis.
As we're waiting for those questions to come in, I absolutely loved what Elder Anderson said. We have to have relationship. Having that plan, doing your homework, I think that is key, but also have relationships so you understand what the faith-based organization, their strength is. There are going to be certain churches that have phenomenal, say, homeless ministries or feeding ministries that necessarily don't do HIV work that you can partner. Every church doesn't have to do HIV work, but if you, again, look at those social determinants of health, find a faith-based organization and their strength, you can go ahead and partner with them very easily to do the HIV work as well. And I think it's just important that we just don't show up, like you said, hey, we want to do something on Saturday when that's a day that we hold holy, or just really just knowing what your ask is when you go in to speak with that faith leader. I just thought that was a really good point that you made, Elder.
Thank you, Pastor.
So we have probably one of the most important questions we will receive today. The question is, what are some first initial steps to work with a faith-based entity?
Sure. I think that's a good question. I think it goes down to relationships. Show up, a couple of times, maybe during the week when they have midweek service, or even on a Saturday or Sunday, whenever they have service, sort of get a feel of the congregation. If it's an older congregation, then certainly they're not going to participate in an AIDS walk. They're not going to do any heavy lifting, etc. But those are perfect folks to help, like say, put together hygiene kits if you're going to test and do night outreach. Again, most websites of faith-based organizations, you can pull up by the zip code and go to their website, see what their mission is. You want to make sure that what you want to do aligns with their mission. There are going to be some churches, as elders said, that are going to give some pushback, but find the thing that they're good at and they want to do. The key is that as a pastor, you cannot come in and tell me how to run my church, my mosque, my synagogue, whatever it may be, but you can be a community partner and I can be a liaison with you to get a lot of the work that you all need to get done. If I have a congregation of 3,000 or 4,000, that's easy to get socks, which could be an incentive that you use to entice folks to come and get an HIV test. Hygiene kits, blankets when it gets cold, even coats for that matter. I think those are all things that you can utilize as well. You may not get condom distribution, or you might get condom distribution. We do communion on the front table and condoms on the back table at the hub, but every church is not going to do condoms, but you can easily put them in a brown paper bag and hand those out to your clients. It's just something that's not announced. So there's ways to get around and establish relationships and get around getting the work done that needs to be done. And most churches, believe it or not, if you don't go for what I call the big steeple churches, look for no steeple churches. I know why someone wants to go someplace where it's 16,000 members because you think you're going to get a lot of tests, but you're not really going to get a lot of positives. But if you go to a no steeple church, those are the ones that aren't going to have, again, a high steeple church. They're going to be your storefronts. They're going to be in the hood. They're going to be in your highest prevalence areas. Those are the ones that have smaller congregations, and you may only do 20 tests, but out of that, you'll have 8 positives and 2 people, coming for care to be linked back into care. So sometimes you just have to be strategic with who you want to partner with.
And let me add to that as well, 2 things that I can think of automatically, and I mentioned one as I was speaking. I really think that, especially those that are in prevention and outreach, and those that are trying to retain and get themselves into a community that is very difficult, responding, dribbling, sampling, and snowballing is probably one of the 2 that you can probably do. Identify key or faith-based organizations that you build some and some fellowship that will allow to really introduce the people that's within. And I think the second piece, I feel, but I think to bring it back. It's very simple to do. We all have some type of CAB or community board as well. Individual, these faith-based organizations, especially for those that have already co-signed, and build some type of alliance where you guys can regularly meet and hear the need from that community that can then be a programmatic thing for your agencies. Most time it's called administrative or round table, but to be inclusive, because the pastor may be too busy or the leader of that reformation may be too busy, it may be a representative from their faith-based community, but if some get them me start listening to that community will certainly type of cohesiveness to the programmatic that you're trying to put out in the community, and then they also can retain and recruit for you as well.
Thank you both. Our next question is for Reverend Francis. Can you speak to your experience as a member of clergy and encouraging other clergy to participate in this type of work?
Sure. Another great question. So I'm going to choose to be a little bit transparent here, Alicia. I experienced church hurt before I even became a pastor. So I tell folks that when I do workshops and seminars that I understand the hurt I just may not have experienced the same pain. So 10 years ago, I was actually diagnosed with HIV, and I went to my church because I was a church boy, and I was rejected. It was a horrible experience for me. So my quote that says to allow your pain to push until vision pulls. As I was searching for services, and this is both faith-based as well as within the HIV community, it was very hard for me to find the services that I needed. I was fortunate to then get out of my funk, to get out of my depression, and wound up in a church that I was ordained. I became a pastor now 3 years ago, and set my ministry up because of the work that I was doing within the HIV community. I was fortunate that I was able to go to DC and advocate and stuff here in Atlanta, all through the Southeast. So I've met a lot of pastors. So I want to encourage anyone that is listening. There are a lot of churches out here that are doing the work. The one thing that I have heard most often about pastors is that the HIV community is not in their faces, like say the American Red Cross or the cancer folks, et cetera. So I think we have to do a better job of communicating with faith-based organizations, communicating with pastors to get them the information. You don't have to draw a conclusion for them just by sending them and getting them the information. And I think a lot of times that we don't do that is because we as an HIV community haven't got over our own church hurt. So we don't want to go back to the church in order to help fix it. And I'm admitting that the church has caused some damage within the HIV community, but the HIV community has also caused some damage to themselves. So we have to go ahead and get on that level playing field and have conversations with pastors. This is my want, this is my need, and how can you help me achieve my want or my need? And most pastors will truly, that if a conversation, if it is their idea, they are more apt to pour everything into it. And they may not be the one doing the actual work, but they have health and wellness ministries that you can tap into that are doing blood screenings. They're doing high blood pressure checks on Sunday. It's nothing to train a health ministry to do HIV testing when you aren't available after 5 o'clock and on the weekends. That's when the church is actually doing the feedings and doing stuff on the weekend. But there are already nurses and doctors. They draw blood faster than your faster tester at your agency. So have a conversation with the pastor and just lay out the situation and be specific. I don't want to know what's going on in the Southeast or what's happening in New York. If I'm in Atlanta, give me the information in my zip code and just literally lay it on my lap and just allow me to come back and say, this is what we are willing to do. It may be prayer, it may be financial support, it may be participation in the AIDS walk, it may be opening up our doors to some of the CAB meetings or support groups that are needed, because we have to remember that for a person with HIV, it's mind, body, and spirit. You all only do treatment. Only the faith-based organization can actually care for someone. And again, that's the spiritual aspect that's there. So just have a conversation with faith leaders, find out what their strengths are, and work around those strengths. And if you want a list, hit up Compass and I'll send you a list of pastors in your area that would be more than happy to work with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Reverend Francis. Our next question is to both of our faith leaders. What advice do you have for engaging with the Muslim faith community?
Do you want to take that, Elder?
So for me, my involvement spiritually with the Muslim faith community is more from the need of trans visibility, not so much preferably on HIV. So the one thing that I can speak, and then I'll hand it over to Pastor Francis, because I know there's an initiative in his backyard I know he wonderfully has participated in. But a lot of times, and it's something William said, if we're going to combat and really look at the holistic of HIV, we also have to look holistic for the person. And there's a big, huge discrimination for trans-identified individuals being Muslim. So before I can even have that conversation about health disparities, with the leaders or the individual. We really have to get on the same page on what we call acceptance, because if you can't accept, my gender expression, perhaps my orientation, then it's going to be very difficult for you also to be able to accept a diagnosis such as HIV. In those categories, all of them are high level of stigma, and it's very hard to chisel, and only acceptance is able to reduce that level of stigma for acceptance. And so, William, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. When we were doing the Black Church and HIV social justice imperative, we really targeted Black churches. We did have priests show up. We did have synagogues that showed up. And we had very few from the Muslim faith that showed up, but there was a couple that did come to events. There is definitely an issue of HIV within the Muslim faith, but because they're somewhat closed off, if you would, I think it's best to have someone that speaks that language. And you had talked about culture earlier. It would be very difficult for me as a Christian pastor to go into a mosque and have that conversation. So there may be clients that that are of the Muslim faith. It would be best to ask them what would work within the mosque, what information would work. There is the National HIV Faith Day, National HIV Faith Day. There is a young lady, her name is Khadija Abdullah, that has headed that up. She is very, very heavily involved. Well, she's Muslim as well, but very heavily involved within the Muslim faith and really getting HIV work done through the Muslim faith. She has a Muslim retreat that she does every year with Muslims that are living with HIV, has been doing some phenomenal work. So I would definitely advise you all just to look her up on Facebook or go to the National Faith HIV page and just message her. Dynamite young lady, knows her stuff. But I think she is the type of person that I want to have in my arsenal if I was going to engage something within the, someone within the faith Muslim community.
Okay. And so both faith leaders talked about the culture of the church. And so this next question is for you, Elder Anderson, about how has it been as an open woman of trans experience and a member of clergy being engaged within the Black church?
Oh, wow. Good testifying time. Amen. This is what I like. Let the church say amen.
Amen.
The interesting part is amen. The interesting part is that, in Black church and, in my culture, my Black church experience is Pentecostal. I'm Grand Old Church of God in Christ. And so, some may can resonate with that, but that hand clapping, foot stomping, tongue talking, tithes paying, Pentecostal, nowhere in makeup, long dresses, not cutting your hair, and all the above. And of course, we do not believe in homosexuality. We don't believe in transitioning from our gender. So just a lot of trauma that I've gone through. One of the ironic things of my call and my yes into ministry over 20-something years ago was because I knew that I will be an example to combat their messaging of how we try to articulate God's love, perhaps, since I'm Christian, as well as how we're interpreting the book that we call the Good News. And so it had its challenges at the beginning, but there's a couple scriptures that really motivates me and that really confirms that I'm really walking in my purpose, and I really feel that I'm being honored by the Creator and the universe for doing so. But if it's the scriptures to be true, not every person, and it's something William said, as a Christian preacher, it's going to be very difficult for me to go and have conversations, with another reformation of some sort. It's not my culture. But I am also aware from my Christian teaching that no one will be left without a witness. And so to me, it's going to take diversity to get into some of these communities and subpopulations. No one can speak as elegant and trans language, in HIV or spiritual, what have you, than a person like me. I will get more honey with me showing up than someone who is cis-identified, lack of cultural competency for that community. And so I knew early enough that if I am going to walk in purpose and make a difference, then I have to say yes to the call, no matter what the struggle will be of rejection from my denomination of rearing. And I would like to say that it has repaired, and I have full standings also with them at times when I need to go back and actually minister. But I combat being Black and familiar with the epidemic of HIV, which is the reason for the high passion is that people are dying in our congregation, in our faith-based arena, because we won't have the intentional conversation. We rather use some type of scripture bylaw to cover up having this intentional conversation. But the scripture, now I feel like I want to preach now, from a Christian standpoint, says I'd rather you be hot or cold. And my decision was made. What I will not do is allow someone to define what my hot or cold or judge it. Understand that I'm not lukewarm. I'm living out my truth. I'm giving the good news, and the good news resurrects things that are dying, things that are discriminated. It brings things back whole, and I have the ability through my narrative and as a Pentecostal preacher to reconcile what the church isn't doing, and I'm very motivated in doing that. So I hope that answers that question for you.
Thank you so much, Elder Anderson. I feel like now I'm waiting for the A and B choir song after those comments. But I want to stay right. I want to stay right there for a minute. Don't forget the offering. It's probably offering 2 times by now.
Yes.
But I want to stay right there for a minute. This is a question for both of you. Has it been easier working with inclusive and affirming churches versus those that are not?
No.
And and I want to make sure, Reverend Francis, you already hit on that earlier, but I think it's worth repeating. So we want to hear from both of you.
So I am asked all the time if the hub is inclusive and affirming, and I say no. Because we have really taken inclusive and affirming to mean, are you a gay church? If you are gay, LGBTQ, if you are transgender, if you are a sex worker, if you use substance, if you are homeless, you are more than welcome at the hub. I think sometimes working with those that are inclusive and affirming, it can be somewhat one-sided. And I say that because I've been asked to speak at several churches, and I sort of get yelled at representing the church, because again, I think what it really boils down to is healing from church hurt. We have all been church hurt. That is nothing that is LGBTQ specific. One way or the other, we have been hurt by the church or a faith-based organization. We understand that. But at the end of the day, the Spirit is a part of us, and we have to figure out how to maneuver through that hurt and get to healing. And I think that is very key. We've adopted Help, Hope, Heal, because I don't think we do a very good job of getting to healing. We want to walk with a person, but we really don't want to walk all the way with them. We want to hand out sandwiches on Saturday, but we're not really thinking about how other folks are going to eat Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We want to get engaged in conversations around sexuality, but we really don't want to teach comprehensive sex education. So no, it has not been easier working with affirming and inclusive churches that are labeled affirming and inclusive. One, because they think they're the experts on LGBTQ community, and that's not necessarily so. We have said that and this is with any religion, I'm not just speaking from the Christian perspective, the book is for all people. The book is for all people. I can take a scripture and use it to keep a woman out of a pulpit, or I can use that same scripture to put a woman in the pulpit. So there's a lot of that goes on. It boils down to one's theology. It boils down to one's interpretation of the scripture. But if we all look at whatever We're looking at the Quran, the Veda, the Talmud, etc. If we look at context as well as content, I think we would have a better understanding of theology. And our whole thing here at the Hub and my personal ministry is I don't look at, how a person presents or whatever. I look at their purpose, I look at their calling, I look at their gifting. And that is my call and my job to pull that out of them so they can be the best person that they can be. So we've had folks that have come needing to get back into care. We've got them into care. We didn't ask how you got HIV. It's you needed to get back in care. We're working with those of trans experience now with the church. It's been interesting because that was brand new for us. But I can walk up into an inclusive and affirming church and receive the same non-exclusivity and non-affirming said because I'm a heterosexual male. But yet I do a lot of work within the community and still not accepted. And I went to a woman of trans experience, her funeral, probably about 2 years ago. The person that was presiding over the funeral asked for all affirming and inclusive pastors to come up front. And that was not directed at me. So that was the same shunning that you may get if you go into another church. And I think we just all need to come together, just agree to disagree, and let's get the actual work that needs to be done. But that's all I'm going to say, because I don't want to start calling out no names.
Thank you, William. And I do agree with William, and I am part of what we call this affirming and inclusive movement 15 years now, and I do see the difference, and I have privilege to still go back to the traditional fundamental. I think a lot of times what happens is even before we can even speak about doing effective work such as reducing HIV within our faith-based settings, that we forget that how are we defining affirming and how we're defining inclusivity? Are we overcompensating to accept, to validate the individual? And I think that that's been the biggest challenge is that from my own personal experience, there is an Elohim, which is a oneness that keeps me completed, that I don't need that level of validation from a traditional or affirming or inclusive. And I believe that's what Pastor Will is talking about, is that we are all created as one. But when we overcompensate, then it pulls and we segregate. And it makes it harder for us to chisel and bring these programmatic things that's needed to reduce this level of epidemic HIV, because we have to change the language based off of the segregation, which is needed. I think a lot of times in the affirming and inclusive church, what I have found that has been very shocking is that if you have no blueprint, just like there's really not a blueprint of how to really transition, to live out your truth, you just dive in. But before you dive in, there's there's checks and balances, trial and errors that you have to do. And I really feel that from my experience, affirming inclusive, only duplicating what they came out of. So, but attaching with a different type of language or to what we were saying earlier, that's why it's important that we do our homework. You come to my personal church, you will feel like you're still at a Church of God in Christ, or as we say, a Kojic church, but we're opening an affirming ministry, and we're not even attached to the Kojic church. But because that's our narrative, when we built the ministry and we came out of it, you're going to get the same feeling or whatnot. Then there's other places that shun anything we came out of, and everything is going to provide that openness of validation. So why am I going backwards and forward? It's because that is how enriched this community is, with the diversity of what we should believe, how we should teach it, what we should have, and then we become very territorial of our reformations, of our congregation, because then we feel as the leader, we're responsible for them to experience no hurt. But yet we have HIV that is running rampantly, and yet we have ministries who are overprotecting and now allowing the resources to come in. And so I do feel that it is particular work, HIV, or ministry at times with inclusive and affirming individuals, because we're some sensitive people. We're just very sensitive, because all we know was to operate through a place of hurt. And when we feel that we're now in a place of healing, because we're in a good place, because someone has finally accepted who I am and possibly accepted that I'm HIV positive, and really I'm looking for of the medication, not so much of going to the doctor. As long as my validation of being accepted makes me feel human, I feel that I'm walking in healing, and at times that it's experienced in the affirming and inclusive ministry.
And you see
All
a
right.
lot of stigma within the HIV community as well. I mean, I'm actually somewhat taken aback that folks think that all churches do is sit around and talk about LGBTQ issues, and that's really not the case. Most churches will not turn away folks of LGBTQ persuasion. That just has not been my experience in going in to churches. There are some, and I understand that. But within the HIV community, there is so much work that needs to be done with folks that between having HIV and AIDS, those that are on PrEP, or those, I mean, it just amazes me that we don't do more work on ourselves so we can become somewhat whole. And I just think that that's a lot of where faith-based organizations can help work with that wholeness and purpose.
Yeah.
So, pastors, let me just give you a time check. I know that y'all are trained to give us 3 points with every question, but we are down to our last 9 minutes, and we still have 3 very important questions, and we want to make sure to get your responses captured on this webinar. So let me just stay right here with the Black church for a minute. There's a question that came in that says, coming from a large Southern CBO, we are trying to engage with some of the Black churches in our community. I am white, but my staff are Black, and we are looking for ways to engage with these churches. Any advice to this participant?
So in Greensboro, we're actually doing an event June 30th, where we've got all of the CBOs and churches to participate in a generic event that all health screenings are going to be done. And sometimes you just have to step outside of the HIV box and do something community driven and collaborate with other agencies across the board. The Black church is going to be interested in blood pressure. They're going to be interested in cancer. They're going to be interested in nutrition, et cetera. So look at doing more collaborative efforts and engaging all of the churches in your area. I think that would work very effectively.
And for time constraints, the only thing that I would say, and this is to be a little facetious, but it's true, Black Southern churches, we like to eat. Bring us to the table with some food, and then take the recommendations that Pastor Francis just provided. But food to us is fellowship, and it will really get us to the table really quick to then start engaging, and then you can pour in your programmatic conversations as time permits with doing that fellowship.
And get a Black pastor in your area on board, and he can pull other pastors on board.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So the next question is from a case manager. What advice can you offer case managers working with some clients whose pastors have excommunicated them from the church, asking them not to come back?
Go to another church.
And that's an easy response to say, go to another church. But case management is very unique because case management provides the nurturing that client needs. So I'm going to add everyone, everyone should have some type of referral, list of products get off the clients. And so when you get clients who are being or disfellowship, as we say, from that congregation or from their faith, then take the extra extended and say, well, these are some of the resources that I'm aware of. Gaychurch.com is one if they are part of that community. And then there's other churches that list that they actually have health disparity or HIV ministries. Use that also as a reference to give to the client. It gives them at least options. You may not be able to fix their problem, but if they take advantage of that referral, go there, they may find their next place in destiny. And the reason why they were disfellowship, it was time for them probably to move on.
A safe place is a safe place. I was excommunicated because I had HIV, not because I was gay. So gaychurches.com ain't gonna help me. Just find safe places for folks to go. I'm agreeing with you, but it just can't be a gay thing. We keep re-stigmatizing HIV as a gay disease, and it's not a gay disease. People disease.
Well, a lot of times, and the reason why I say that, when we look at referrals, they have to be diverse. And as I stated in my comment, is that if they are part of that community, that will still be a good resource for them. I will hate for someone who is trans or someone's orientation who's MSM or a lesbian. We send them or give them a referral to a church that won't be able to also focus on their truth versus going through gay.org, which gives them a list of places that could be brave for them. So that was it was just an example.
Okay. And for our final question, which is a hot topic right now in HIV, in the South, what does the faith-based community need in order to be actively engaged in ending the epidemic by 2030, known as our EPE 2030 plan?
They need to be asked to join the fight.
I will agree. And showing, I would say show up to be counted when there's opportunities for them to receive that love of learning, as well as be intentional about wanting to show up to be counted in order to do this work and get into the fight. And, just be very educated, and then hopefully have the level of empathy that would also change your way that you articulate behind, the pulpit or your messaging, and make it a way. And this is when I then bring it on board, make it so inclusive that they understand that HIV does not discriminate.
Okay, so we are now coming to a close. First, I want to thank Elder Carmarion D. Anderson and Reverend William Francis for such wonderful insight on the faith community today. We also want to thank you for listening and asking some extremely important questions as we continue to move forward with our collaboration and partnership with faith-based communities. This webinar will be available on our website for reference. If you want to learn more about the topic or request a training, please apply to our website at www.gileadcompass.com. Tune in next month on Thursday, July 18th, for the Human Resources, Recruitment Policies, and Equity. Until next time, have a great day, and thank you for listening.